Yucca Valley is a small community. We're about 25 miles north of Palm Springs, California. In between Palm Springs and 29 Palms, where the big military base is at. We have about 21,500. Our population really hasn't changed all that much. And as we said, it's a rural community. We're known for our proximity to the Joshua Tree National Park. We're right adjacent. In fact, one of the campgrounds for Joshua Tree National Park, Black Rock Campground, is in just outside the boundary of Yucca Valley. People come from all over the world and the United States and California to Joshua Tree National Park, not only to view the landscape, but really to view the Western Joshua tree. It's an amazing plant, tree, not sure exactly what it's called on the scientific basis, but it's a beautiful tree, and people come to look at it from all over the place. We've had in Yucca Valley protections for that tree for many, many years, since incorporation in our native plant ordinance. We've identified that it's of value, and it has characteristics that are not in other species, and so we've protected that. Recently, there was a petition brought forward to the California Fish and Game Commission to list the Western Joshua tree as an endangered species in accordance with the California Endangered Species Act. We call it for short CESA. So that's California Endangered Species Act. And the Western Joshua tree was proposed as a candidate, what's called a candidate species. Ultimately, the Fish and Game Commission did not vote yet to place it as a protected species, but rather they left it as a candidate species. According to California law, if a species is a candidate species, it receives the exact same protections as if it is protected and listed. So with that in place, residents, anyone that was in proximity to a Western Joshua tree was prohibited from what's called a take. And you would think, well, maybe a take is the removal of a tree. It's not. It can be touching the tree. It can be not touching the tree, but being in proximity, depending on how that proximity is defined, without even touching the tree. You cannot do anything without what's called an incidental take permit. Now, that's current in place. And so in Yucca Valley, we have neighborhoods in Yucca Valley that are basically woodland Western Joshua tree communities. And so you can have a parcel with 50, 75 trees on it in your backyard. Some of the challenge that we have, I'd say, are probably twofold. One is for our resident, a small property owner that has just a regular property, and they may need to do basic infrastructure work. Yucca Valley is a rural community. Many of the neighborhoods were built before incorporation when it was unincorporated county area, and they're still on septic tanks. If they have to remove a septic tank, they have to get a permit, and based on the current guidelines and guidance that's being proposed by the department currently through their conservation plan, there's a buffer zone of 50 feet around every tree. So you can imagine now, and we actually did this, we brought in an independent consultant to take a look at 3 properties as an example. If we needed to remove the septic tank and the homeowner needed to put a new one in, what would the mitigation fees be associated with the Western Joshua tree?
Because you have to move, or you might be touching an area close to that
or you
tree.
might be within 50 feet.
Within 50 feet, even if you don't touch it.
Correct, yeah. Those fees for those homeowners are estimated at $40,000 to $60,000 just for the permit to do their work.
Just to get the permit?
Correct, without doing the work.
So essentially is the penalty for touching that
for
area.
being in proximity to the Western Joshua tree. You know, we're very cooperative with all of the agencies that are involved in this issue. And I don't believe that the Fish and Game Commission, when they've heard of these incidents come in, the department staff, the legislatures, and quite frankly, I wouldn't even think the environmental proponents of preservation of the Joshua tree would think that that's a good outcome. It doesn't make any sense. There's not been any movement yet on how to address that. And so that's really where we're at today. It's a challenge for our individual homeowners to be able just to do, whether it's infrastructure like a water line or a septic tank or building a garage or an accessory dwelling unit. All of those require what's called a ground disturbing permit. And you have to be in compliance now with the Western Joshua Tree Act, as well as California Endangered Species Act with respect to the Western Joshua tree. So it's a tremendous issue for our local residents and our homeowners. That's the first primary concern. The second primary concern is that there is not clear guidance yet on how do you manage this in projects. And so, for example, the town of Yucca Valley has a state guideline of how many homes we need to address our housing need in Yucca Valley. And our current number is around 800 that's been identified. So we need about 800 new homes to be able to keep up with the housing demand in our area. We don't have significant areas of vacant land without Joshua trees. So we have, for example, we have a couple of parcels that may be 20, 40, 60 acres where a developer can come in and potentially do a housing development. They would have to mitigate for the Western Joshua trees that are on that parcel. And we have some areas where you would have literally tens of thousands of Joshua trees, and not full-grown Joshua trees, but the way that it's defined is a Joshua tree is anything from a sprout in the ground to a full-grown tree. So you may have one tree, it looks like one or two trees, but when you go down around the base of it, there may be 20 trees or 30 trees because they're sprouts.
And 50 feet around those.
Correct. Yes. And so what it's caused basically is developers in Yucca Valley to say, time out, there's too much uncertainty here. We don't know how we would pass that cost on to the potential home buyer. And it becomes a real problem for being able to deliver some of those housing units that are so required in our area.
We're going to pause our conversation with Curtis to talk to local residents. We sit down with Madelaine LaVoie to see how they are impacted. Can you tell us how you guys are impacted?
It's been actually really a horrible situation. We have permit issues. For example, I'm about to do an addition on my daughter's home. And in doing so, I had to get a special permit done with an arborist. And so this arborist had to come and say, this is how many Joshua trees you have and fill in the gaps, so to speak. And there was no Joshua trees on her particular lot, but I still had to pay $850 for a piece of paper that said that she doesn't have any Joshua trees on her lot. Now, if I had Joshua trees on the lot, I would then have to do permits for each Joshua tree. It can be as high as $2,500 per tree for just the permit. There's permit fees that are absolutely extraordinary, and it makes it almost completely impossible to build on any lot that has Joshua trees within a 50-foot radius of where you plan to build.